welcome you to the Priscilla R. Tyson Cultural Arts Center for our Conversations and Coffee on this 28th day of September 2023. I'm Ellen O'Shaughnessy, coordinator of the program. We're celebrating today this amazing gallery exhibit by the brothers Tim and Ted Murphy, whose art surrounds us and brings us a visual treat that combines Ted's exquisite watercolor, gouache scenes from nature, with Tim's mixed media figurative commentaries on the human condition. Let's stand up, you two. Brothers Murphy. Yes, thank you. Isn't it wonderful that they are with us? And that Ted has taken time to be with us from New York, no less, huh? And Tim, you live in Pickerington, huh? Wonderful. Thank you. The opening reception, August 25th, was a celebration. It was wonderful. Tim is a Columbus-based artist whose mixed media is primarily with ceramics and paints. Tim has a Bachelor of Arts degree from Mount Vernon Nazarene University. He has worked in the collections of George Leach, Royal Gottlieb, Thomas Arlen Wagner, among others. Tim shares that he says, 60 years old. Age is a matter of mind. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter, huh? But you've been making art, as you say, for several decades. And I noticed that you started when you were about 14 years old you were fascinated by human faces. I love that story. You're married to your wife, Lori, who's with us. Lori, stand up. We're so glad to have you. Married for 38 years, and you have 4 children and 3 grandchildren. Tim has been twice awarded the Jurors Award at the Ohio State Fair Show and won first prize at the Ohio Art League's Fall Juried Show in 2019. Tim's work is unusual in that he combines 3-dimensional ceramic heads with a 1-dimensional painted surface. He works with acrylic, oil-based paint, and oil-based glazes to create the good versus evil themed, figurative, and narrative pieces. Quite a meditation over there as we stand and gaze at your work. Ted, who just came in again from New York, graduated from Mount Vernon Nazarene College, majoring in art and philosophy in 1980. Ted earned a Master of Fine Arts from The Ohio State University in 1983, concentrating in painting and drawing. Ted is currently professor of art at the Houghton University in Houghton, New York. Ted has been awarded Excellence in Teaching 2003 and the Mabel Barnum Davidson Distinguished Professor of Fine Arts Award. He's been represented by the Baradorf Gallery and the Frost Gully Gallery. Ted has shown his work regionally as well as nationally. He has work in numerous private and public collections. Ted describes himself as a painter. Watercolor, gouache, oil, pastel are his preferred media. His current body of work reflects an intersection between landscape and still life. These are found, still life landscapes. In addition to his regular classes in painting, design, drawing, and artistic anatomy, he's taught classes in Shakespeare and film, the works of Hitchcock, myth and film, the history of the art of film, European Renaissance art through early Romantic, modern, and contemporary art. Great, a professor, no less, in New York. Huh? Amazing. Ted is married to Nancy for 41 years, and Nancy's a retired mental health counselor at Houghton University. They have 3 adult children and 2 grandsons. Brothers, Tim, Ted, we're so delighted you're with us. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm going first because I think technologically speaking, is ready to go. So what I thought I would do is talk about some of the origins of this particular body of work. When you're an academic painter, you have the privilege, you're already getting paid by the school you work at, so you don't really have to live off your work. And it's given me a lot of freedom to experiment, to try a lot of different things. I've had years where I did exclusively works in portraiture, figure work. I do a lot of abstract painting still. It's actually something I think that I have to do once in a while, especially when you're doing the sort of tight, hard edge realist work. So this this body of work came out about 3 years ago, and so I thought I would talk a little bit about its origin and what some of my thinking is that's going with that. I was actually doing a lot of plein air painting. I would take my work out. I actually moved into watercolor partly because as my children reached high school, the opportunity to work in the studio became less and less a reality. You know, you're always at their sporting events, their plays, you just always running the roads with your kids. And so I began to carry my paint with me. And I would paint at the soccer game. I actually had a softball land right in the middle of my lap while I was painting. And you know, at first, I teach at a school that's in a very rural part of Western New York, and most of the families that attend the public school where my kids went were in the farming community and not professional in the sense that we think of that term. But they got used to seeing me paint. They were interested in it, and so it wasn't such a strange thing after a while. So painting, I could carry it with me. I could do it all the time. I would, with family, go out to dinner, and I would, while we're waiting for our food, I would paint, you know. And so that practice of constantly painting in an environment made I got better and trying to do different things with watercolor. And so I was doing landscapes, and I was actually using a lot of photographs with my paintings, and I was photographing some subject matter. And it occurred to me when I looked down at the ground that the stuff that was there was just as interesting, if not more interesting to me, than the things that are way out there in the vista, and what we think of as landscape as this distant space. And it occurred to me that this also addressed my interest in collage, which I have been very interested in. So this is the first painting I did, and I look at it now, it's quite loose, really, compared to the work I'm currently doing. So it was out on an October walk with my wife and our friend Kathy, and you could see that it's just the leaves as they lay with rocks and other materials. So that was the first one I did in this series. This idea of getting up close intimately to the natural world is something that grew out of the Renaissance. I mean, this artist, Albrecht Dürer, this very familiar image to most people who know art history, often called the Great Patch of Turf or the patch of glass. He went outside his studio, presumably, and stuck a spade in the ground and cut this out and brought it back in the studio and did a watercolor gouache painting of it. And scholars disagree about what prompted Albrecht Dürer to do this. It was an unusual thing to do during the Renaissance. Artists rarely just made work out of a caprice. That was almost always a commission. It's obvious that he's probably partly doing it so that he could have this material in his paintings. In fact, if you look at his nativities or something, you can see a lot of this kind of stuff in the corner of his paintings. And of course, the Northern Renaissance artists were very interested in the natural world. They took a more what we call Aristotelian view, that the universals are present in the particulars around us in the natural world. That grew out of Aquinas, it grew out of even Dante's writing. And so Albrecht Dürer is actually, these can be seen as somewhat spiritual meditations on something that is quite innocuous, just weeds growing up, and they look very familiar to us. In fact, it looks all too much like my yard. But this is an example, though, of something that I've always thought is interesting. It's a landscape, but it's extremely intimate. The other artist that I was also thinking about was an artist who was one of the very first artists that I actually connected with as a student in college. You know, that difficult time when you're sort of opening up to the artist, not just skill, it's ideas. And Kurt Schwitters, to me, was an example of an artist who was making these extremely abstract objects, essentially out of trash. He's associated with the Dada movement, that anti-rational movement that started in France. It actually is like a morphic resonance. It happened all over Europe at the same time. Artists and intellectuals were in despair over the devastation of the First World War. And they made very anti-rational art because look what rationality has brought us to, this war that was devastating, horrific, and nobody could make any sense of it. And so he wanted to quite literally make art from the detritus of a destroyed society. So he would just pick up trash and then rearrange it into these really quite eloquent compositions. They're very small, and the scale of the pieces appealed to me. I'm a person who loves books, and the intimate experience of a one-on-one reading of a book and looking at a painting like this is very similar. So Schwitters is very important to me. And so you look at the two and you think, well, what possible connections are there between these two? To me, it's the intimacy and the organization that I found so interesting. In one sense, both of these are kind of a found sort of thing. I don't think Albrecht Dürer arranged this. He just brought it in and looked at it. He may have made some changes. I do that too. And the fact that Schwitters is making his stuff out of trash, which is essentially a very ephemeral material, they have a hard time preserving his work because they keep fading and changing, and because they're made of things that were not meant to last. But in a sense, it's found material as well. So, you know, here's an example of a Trillium painting of mine next to it's somewhat an act of hubris on my part to compare myself to Albrecht Dürer, but the positioning is very similar. A lot of times I work by looking straight down approximately 18 to 12 inches away from my subject. That's an interest of mine, to maintain that kind of close observation. But occasionally I'll take them at an angle, and this is an example where I took one looking at this spring flower. Here you can see one of my paintings next to a Schwitters painting, and it's rather serendipitous that we use the same kind of shape in there. It's important that you understand that Schwitters meant for his work to be a protest of sort. He called them the Märzbau, which basically means kind of the fecal matter of society. I mean, it's a very scatological kind of reference. And he actually built this in his house. He turned his whole house into a collage. Unfortunately, that house didn't survive World War II, and now we have a replica of it. But it was meant to be a kind of protest, this idea of the randomness and the discarded. But I still find them extraordinarily beautiful objects. And another artist at that time that meant a lot to me was the work of Robert Motherwell. And Robert Motherwell, if those of you who know his work, know that he also does a lot of collage work. I think collage is actually one of the great art forms of the 21st and 20th century. Ellen mentioned that I've taught many courses on film. Film is a kind of collage of splicing together celluloid into a coherent, or not always so coherent, visual experience. I think that our lives are very collaged. I mean, the elision between tragedy and absurdity on television is just sort of a maddening event. It's a kind of experiment with that. And so to me, the idea of it as being kind of random and found is very important. So there's another Kurt Schwitters collage. There's an example of one of my abstract paintings. It was done about the same time these are done. I work back and forth. And that's quite small. It's a mixed media piece. And then there's a rather recent painting. Most of the paintings that I have in my slides here are not paintings that are in the show. I mean, I do one of these about every 3 days, so I have a lot of them to reference. So I thought I would also show you some work that I've done since the show came up, and this is one that was done. And again, the idea that there is this almost pseudo-script of the way the leaves sort of have fallen. I should say that I don't manipulate. I tried it once. There was a beautiful leaf, and I moved it into my photograph, and I took it, and I've never forgiven myself for that. I look at that painting, and I just think it's an abomination. And you wouldn't know to look at it. You would probably think, well, why would that be a problem? But to me, I like to think that these things, because so much of my work is about time, or the passage of time, or questions about mortality, the fact that this was probably like this for just a couple of seconds before the wind or somebody stepped on it or whatever, and it changed. But to me, it has that kind of reference. And if you're familiar with the mythology of the Sibyls that are on the Sistine Chapel, the Cumaean Sibyl that Michelangelo painted is said to have written the meaning of life out onto leaves and then blew the leaves out into the world. And so the information's out there. We just haven't been able to put it all back together. And so to me, the fact that these almost formed letters was a fascinating thing. This is how they look when I'm working on them. I do a very detailed drawing, and I make decisions about leaving some things out. I don't add things, but sometimes I leave things out or I simplify things. I interpret them. I also change color. If I feel like making something more green or something more lavender for compositional reasons, because to me, the driving force in this is always formal. Is this an arrangement of things that compel the heart in a particular way? And there are obviously limits to what you can say about art beyond what seems self-evident. So the titles that I give them, I'm very interested in passages of time, seasonal things. One of my favorite filmmakers is Uzu, the Japanese master. He often had titles like Late Spring, An Autumn Afternoon, the Taste of Green Tea Over Rice. That's a wonderful title for a film. These are deeply spiritual kinds of acknowledgments. And so sometimes I have things like just capstone with leaves. It was one of these capstones on a cement wall at Letchworth State Park that I go to several times a week. Burning car is more reference to my father. Tim and I, our dad used to make us rake leaves, and we always liked it. I liked the smell of burning leaves, and he would rake the leaves into a blanket and then take the blanket over to the burning pile and just empty it out. And we were doing this all afternoon, and then my mom told us that she had lunch ready, and he threw the blanket in the car. But apparently there was a burning leaf, and while we were eating lunch, she said, "Ralph, the car's on fire." And so we looked out, and sure enough, it was engulfed in flames. So it's actually a portrait of my dad, who passed away a few years ago at almost 97. But I associate the leaves with my father. Sometimes I'm interested in the juxtapositions. I did indeed come across this lone lot leaf sitting right there, one of those orange painted forms. But here's an example of a piece that I finished just a couple days ago called Drift, of sycamore leaves. I felt like the complexity of the floor or the asphalt, making it more ambiguous in sort of a dark. That's some of the things that I'll do to manipulate them as I'm working. I'm interested in rocks. I actually prefer to paint the rock forms, but I think people are getting a little tired of them because you can just tell people are getting worn out by rocks. But to me, they're just so interesting, and they're the opposite in many ways of the leaves. The leaves might come and go in just a couple of moments, but in many cases, these rocks have perhaps even predated human beings. I mean, some of these have been sitting there in Maine or in Alaska, the Pacific Coast one. I went to Homer, Alaska on that mysterious thing they call the Homer Spit. And, you know, some of these things have probably been there forever, before any of us were there to see them. I like the fact that this particular image had this hot cross bun sort of thing there. And this other one is actually close by to where we live in the Genesee River. But I'm actually very interested in trying to master the look of rocks. And then, of course, the third rail of this is the floral and tree kind of things. And I sort of see them all as a piece. Sometimes you see the flower is competing with the leaves, as you do in the hyacinth painting. And then this sort of recent venturing into what is more of what you tend to think of as the absent negative space. And again, I'm very interested in the Zen art of Ikebana, where they pay as much attention. It's not just flower arrangements. It's a spiritual practice. It's a religious practice. And what they call mu or ma, depending on whether it's nothingness or emptiness, the Japanese, this idea that the spaces between the blossoms are just as important as the positive forms. And so I've been kind of, you see examples of that over there on the wall, some of those that I've tried. Because when you paint these flowers, you wonder, is this all you need? Is this enough? And so I'm not quite sure of it. So here's some lilies from my yard. When I talk about influences, I mean, all artists have this Rolodex in their head of people that they love. I mean, I think Morandi sits next to God in heaven. One of the things that I admire about Morandi is the very subtle shifts of gray in his still lifes. I've been to his studio in Bologna. These are the ugliest bottles that you've ever seen. I mean, no self-respecting ceramist would ever make these things. And that he made these sort of transcendent paintings out of such homely objects. I think that was part of the goal. They're never about the bottles. They're about something metaphysical beyond them. But I think he's a brilliant colorist by not actually hitting us with a lot of Bonnard, Matisse-like color, which I deeply love both those artists. But this very close shift of tonal grays is one of the things that makes me keep going back to the rocks. And so I'll just end with these two images. Again, they're works that are not in the show, but actually the wheel is a part of a collection of somebody. The driftwood piece was done a couple of weeks ago. To me, this idea of time is quite a fascinating thing, that we live in the moment, but it doesn't endure. All we have is the future and the past and this moment that we can never quite grasp. And so the passage of my own mortality is something that I'm becoming increasingly aware of. I know I look quite a bit younger than Tim, but I'm actually older by 5 years. I think that at a certain point in our life, we start to think about, as we each in turn disappear from the earth, how will we be remembered? Obviously, you want to be remembered by the people that you knew, and that you loved, and that loved you back. But they also will each in turn transition out. And so I sometimes think that one of the great things that art is about is leaving a record. There's a wonderful passage in a poem by Rilke in his Duino Elegy number 9, when he says, perhaps we're here just to say the word tree. Sounds so simple, you think, I know he's up to something here. And he's right. I mean, the existentialist perspective is that we say, I was here, I saw this meant something to me. It was gone in a flash. And really, any life, no matter how long it is quite a flicker compared to the geologic time. And the piece that's wheel reminds me of that kind of medieval notion of fate, what brought us here, what will take us out of here. So these pieces are not just snapshots of the world. They're meditations on that, to sort of think deeply and poetically about our relationship to these things. And so I like the fact that people aren't sure quite what they are. Are they still lifes? I mean, the proximity is like a still life. Still life is often flowers, often pieces of things, the trunk of a tree. But to me, they're also landscapes, but on a more intimate scale. So I will turn it over to Tim, and then after he's concluded, we'll open to some of your questions.
I was just going to say, possibly, anyone want to respond to you, Ted? Anybody have a thought?
I just love how your paintings look like photos. I didn't even realize when I first started looking at them that they were painted.
Everybody hear that?
Amazing.
No.
Yeah, she was saying that they have a photographic fidelity to them. It's interesting because a photograph isn't really the same as reality. And it's not that I want them to look like photographs. I use photographs as a transitional point. I compose them inside the camera. So that any of the compositions, like I sometimes have to take a long time to decide what is the best perspective on this thing, because you can walk around them and look down at them. But after I photograph them, I'm interested in what a painting of that photograph will look like. And so then I can make changes. Most photographers make very subtle changes in their work too. I mean, they claim they don't, but we know they do. That's one of the things about photography that's so interesting, is and of course, when photography first started influencing artists in the 19th century, a lot of it had to do with the edge. Artists thought about the edges of their pictures very differently after viewfinders came along. And I think we'll never get away from that and the Japanese print, which had made its way into European art. But I'm very interested in what is the outer edge of the thing, what goes up beyond, above the tree, below the tree. This little piece, how it can be a bit like a synecdoche, where it's a part that represents a very complex whole. So thank you for that observation. Any others?
Anybody else?
I just want to say your works look just like you. If you were on What's My Line, we'd pick you.
I could tell when I came in which was which.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Very nice.
I do have a rather hard bark upon me, I suppose. All right, well, if there are more questions, we can transition back. I'll let Tim talk.
Okay, the next piece I want to talk to you about is actually these 4 paintings right here. I kind of refer to them as my blue-collar paintings. The initial one, which is on the screen, this is called the Night at the Fights. And all 4 of these pieces kind of have this blue-collar grit to them. This one's The Night at the Fights. This one is called Workers Unite. And this one is The End of the Workday. And this one's called Trouble in the Boiler Room. So they all kind of refer to work, especially like blue-collar work. In this one, kind of inspired by George Bellows. I don't know if you know the famous piece called Stag at Sharky's. In the story of that painting, Sharky's was like a saloon bar, but they had a back room that had a boxing ring where guys would fight. And that's how they would earn money, is to fight. You know, the movie Rocky, at the very beginning, Rocky goes and fights in a similar kind of place. They pay him like $40, he knocks the other guy out. They pay him like 17 bucks. But that's kind of the feel of this painting, is this is one of those Stag at Sharkey's kind of place. And then this one over here is Workers Unite. The whole background is a factory, the smoke billowing out of the smokestack. And you've got 3 guys here standing outside this makeshift fence, and there's a barrel with fire to warm the guys, obviously. And then they've got their sign that says, on strike, better wages. And then over here, this is a piece called The Trouble in the Boiler Room. I don't know if you know what a boiler is, but that's how they used to heat buildings like 100 years ago. They'd have a boiler down in the basement. The water would be heated. It would go up through the pipes. There'd be radiators in the rooms, and that's how they got their heat. Now, I don't know if this looks like a boiler. I've never really seen one, but this was all pieces that I got off like the top of our McDonald's restaurant. I do maintenance for McDonald's, so I'm always scavenging little pieces of whatever's left up there, pieces. They do a lot of work on the roof, the HVAC systems and everything. So you've got 2 guys in here. One of them's working on one thing. This guy over here is kind of looking up to try and figure out what's going on. And then down here is a piece called The End of the Workday. This piece might not be as blue collar as the other ones. This piece has guys who are wearing suits and women who are in brightly colored dresses. But overall, the whole feel is similar.
Tim, tell us how you are creating those heads that are so...
So the ceramic heads,
Yeah.
actually I started making those in 2015. I took classes here downstairs in the ceramics room. Eric was my teacher there, Eric. And
Hello. Good to see you. Yeah.
I learned how to do those by, Eric showing me, it's basically you make 2 pinch pots and you put them together, and then you form the face and all of that. You have to poke holes in them so that they don't blow up in the kiln. And in 2015 was when I first did it, and I started getting a whole bunch of them, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with these things. So my wife suggested I had some crosses down in our basement. I have a basement studio. And she said, why don't you put those heads on those crosses? So that's what I started doing. And I painted the bodies very similar to this. And this was a new one that I did recently. But that's what I made with the heads. And I entered those in the state fair that year, and it won the Jurors Award, which was kind of a shock to me. But somebody also bought the piece, and I also had another piece that same year that was also purchased. I think I was told that the juror himself bought the other piece. It was a kind of a mermaid statue. So that was kind of the beginnings of all pretty much everything I do right now either has full-figured ceramic figures, or the heads, the larger heads, or I also make a lot of these smaller heads. You know, they're great for like crowds around the bigger pieces. So over here, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm not real good with this thing. Okay. This is, I have a series of pieces. There's about 8 or 9 of them here that are all kind of religious in nature. And these two in the middle, these two large ones in particular, are, this one's called The Carrying of the Cross, and this one's called The Last Supper, of course. And this one has, I believe, 13 heads on it, and then there's these tiny heads here. So you've got, the disciples, Christ in the middle. Put this piece of driftwood, sorry. This piece of driftwood for the top of the table, and then the front of the table. I was, at this time, I was putting a lot of nonsensical words on here, more just for design than anything. And then there's these lilies kind of representing death, the impending death.
Your facial expressions are amazing.
Well, everybody wants to know which one's Judas. I have my idea. Anybody want to guess? This one? Well, obviously it can be whichever one you want it to be, but this one was the one I had in mind.
He's wearing the same outfit as Judas is in the tree.
What's that?
He's wearing the same outfit Judas is in the tree.
Context.
Oh, that one? Yeah. So anyway, that's that piece, and then this piece is the carrying of the cross, which is on the screen right there. So this frame is where this piece started. It started with the frame. I had a friend whose husband was a art professor at CCAD, and he had passed away. And his whole art supplies, everything he had was in his basement, and she wanted it cleaned out. So anyway, she said, go down there, take everything you want. Well, while I was down there, I found this frame, but it wasn't painted at all, or primed or nothing. It was just raw wood. So I grabbed it, brought it home, started doing, this is like gold leafing on here, and up here. So I started working the frame, and as it got more and more elaborate, I thought, boy, this really kind of needs to be a special topic here. So I was looking through one of my books, and it had a section on the artist Hieronymus Bosch. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. Was he 1500s? Anyway, it had one of his, he did the Garden of Earthly Delights. Was it triptych or, yeah. Anyway, there was one painting that I saw of his called the Carrying of the Cross. And it was kind of the same scenario. I always look at this as being like his supporters down here. Obviously, this is Christ. He's got the crossbeam on his shoulder. These guys right here kind of look like the Pharisees. And then, you know, you've got this guy talking to this guy, but then the part that to me sets the whole thing off is the image of Satan right there. And this wasn't intentional, but the tie that ties this guy's shirt together is pretty much the same as Satan's. So it almost like ties these two together. Any questions on that, or any thoughts?
How much planning do you do for these pictures? Do you sketch them out, or you just start? And see what
I don't
happens?
sketch them out. I really just kind of, what I do is I get like a plywood panel, and I'll put a frame on it. Now this one was a little different because it started with the frame. But, oh, I'm sorry. So I get a plywood panel, put a frame around it, and then prime it, paint it, and then I go into what the subject's going to be. It can be anything. I mean, if you look at what I've done here, you know, you've got circus, you've got like a masquerade ball, you know. I could jump into anything really with these. So the piece that's on the screen right now is also the piece that's right behind. So this is called My Lovely Collection of Masks. And it started out actually from a sketchbook that I have here. A couple years ago, I was just kind of doodling in my sketchbook, and I did this little devil skull alternating pattern. I really liked it. There was something about the red and the white that really appealed to me. And so after that, I did this piece over here. Which uses the same pattern, the red and white. This one, just to talk about this for a minute. Got too many things in my hands. This actually has a lot of layers to it. You've got, at the very back, a newspaper background. And then, sorry, let me try over here so that more people can see. Newspaper first, and then I took China marker and did it like a second layer. And then after China marker, I came in with these ceramic heads. So that's like the third layer. And then these two figures are like the fourth layer. If you're wondering, this piece is called There Ain't No Rest for the Wicked. And, you know, I look at her as she's a prostitute, and he's a guy who's interested. After that piece, I started thinking more about that pattern again with the red and the white. And so I came up with this. This is an old canvas that I had when I was in college, and it's probably about 40 years old. And so I went back to the alternating skull devil pattern. And you know, this piece also has a lot of layers. At the very back, it has some of the white primers showing through, and then you've got oil glaze dripping down, and then on top of that, there's cursive writing going across the whole surface. You'd have to almost get up close to see all the stuff that's going on. And then I didn't have the lady standing there until I felt that it just needed something other than just the pattern. So then I put the lady in front, and so she's basically like having a dinner party, and she's telling her guests, "This is my lovely collection of masks." Any thoughts on that one?
Inga?
Did you deliberately plan to have those devil horns behind her head?
Yeah, those are shadows. Behind her head. No, it just kind of fell that way. So there's the Last Supper piece. The Last Supper?
Last Supper.
Uh-huh.
When did the driftwood find its home on that, in the stage of making it?
Actually, that was my wife's idea. She found that somewhere. I don't remember where. It was we were at some lake or something. And she found that, and as I was starting the process, I think the driftwood came in pretty early. So I have this cupboard, and inside the cupboard, I've got several shelves, and it's just full of heads, different sizes, different colors, different shapes. And I just go to that when I need one and sort through them and find the one that's going to work best for whatever I'm doing. So,
That started when you were very young, fascinated by human expression.
yes.
As you wrote that out for us, that's amazing.
Now, the piece that's on the screen right now is called Between Good and Evil Sits a Man. And that piece started with the central figure, which is a mosaic. His body is a mosaic. Broken bits of ceramic glued on and grouted. And then I made kind of like a park bench for him to sit on. And if you want to see the piece, it's right over here in the corner. And then he's sitting on a board, and then there's a backboard, and on the backboard is two little paintings. The one on the left is a painting with the devil in it, and the one on the right is a painting that has a church and like a priest is standing there. So that's why he's sitting between good and evil. Now the base that has the legs underneath, that base actually was part of an old jewelry box. And it was like a vertical jewelry box, and the top part had several drawers in it, and somebody threw it away, and I salvaged it And over here, I have what I call my drawer paintings. So this piece right here is called Intermission. I don't think I have an image for that one, but it's called Intermission, and it's like the image of the outside of a theater. Like they've been in the theater, they came out to smoke a cigar. This guy actually has a cigar in his mouth. These are full ceramic figures. And the guy with the cigar, to me, looks like he's a mobster, like Al Capone. You know, he used to go to the theater. But this guy kind of has that feel to him. And then the guy next to him is like his bookkeeper or something. And then over here is another guy that kind of looks like the bouncer, you know, the tough guy protecting. And then this one's a piece called The County Fair. You got the Ferris wheel and a couple of figures in the front foreground that look like they've just spent the day at the county fair. And then up here, these are all these box drawer pieces. And then I've got the clown show.
How about coming over and sitting with your brother Ted, and let's take the last 2 minutes for any questions?
So when you started out, you mentioned that
Nice and
paint-
loud there, okay?
Nice and loud. So you started out, you took that canvas behind you, and it was an old canvas from when you were in school. What were you studying in your undergraduate or your beginning?
I have a bachelor's degree in art.
And what kinds of things did you do back then?
Keep forgetting. I'm sorry.
What kinds of things did you do back then?
When I first started painting, I did it was just for the painting class that I was taking, but my professor at the time I started out by doing a dead bird painting, and it was just a sparrow laying on its back. It was kind of fairly realistic. And then I started to do another one, and my professor at the time, he said that I should keep going. So I did like a series of dead birds, and they were all done in kind of like a different style, though. The first one was more realistic. I have one that hangs in our bedroom that I like the most. But yeah, it's just a series of dead birds.
Anybody else?
You're-
Use the microphone.
I can. You
All
can.
right.
You're so obviously completely different in your styles, and not what you're thinking about so much. But what inspired you to come together and have a show together, or have you done this a lot?
Well, I back in 2019, I had a show up on the third floor gallery. I mean, obviously he's my brother, so I had a pretty successful show up there in 2019, and my wife pays attention to, you know, when the jurying for this gallery happens, and she saw that they were wanting people to apply, so she said, why don't you, at first we were going to try and include one of my sons, who's also very artistic, but his life was too busy for that. But anyway, she said, why don't we ask Ted to do it with you? So that's why we ended up doing this together. But it is, I mean, our work is complete opposites, but
Well,
have you figured out which one's the strange one yet?
Yeah,
I can
the-
see that Ted wants to say something.
Well, the title of the show comes from a collection of essays by Teja Cole, African-American author, who I was listening to an interview he was giving on NPR, and he said that we tend to think of literature as fiction and nonfiction. And he was trying to make the jump to visual arts because he writes a great deal about art, and he said that in some ways representational painting is nonfiction, and that abstract painting, and I mean abstraction is a continuum from someone like Van Gogh, you know that it's a tree that he's painting, to something that could be non-objective like a Mondrian or a Rothko. And he said that tends to fall more into the imaginative. And of course, artists don't necessarily think in terms of fiction and nonfiction. And one of my favorite writers, Borges, would write essays and then have fictional material in the essay, or he would have a short story and have actual people show up in his short story. So he was already blurring the lines between fiction and nonfiction and poetry. So I like the title, Known and Strange Things, this idea that I'm painting the familiar and Tim is inventing narratives. But we are in conversation. In fact, we've done some collaborative pieces. Tim would send me a head in the mail, and then I would incorporate it into a painting, and then I'd send him the whole thing, and then he would add to it. We'd do this back and forth, and we exhibited some of those here upstairs at that show. I think there were 5 or 6 of them. They've mostly been cannibalized by our children. They all wanted their own copy of one of these. But I'm always interested in I mean, as a teacher, I've been teaching 45 years, mostly college students. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on with your students. They bring to you ideas. They keep you sharp. They ask interesting questions. All art is very collaborative. I mean, we're all, the audience for new art is almost always other artists. And I think we like that. We're not necessarily always as interested in what people think of our work. I mean, obviously you can over analyze your audience or have them push you around too much. But artists bring a kind of refreshing, because we're interested in material. I mean, when you asked Tim how he goes about making this, I think all of us, it's the material. You know, when you watch a kid with art supplies, and we were talking before about how children make art 2 or 3 years before they learn to read and write. And it's their way of engaging in the world. And I take children's work very seriously. I used to, when I was a janitor at a daycare center between college and graduate school, I used to admire their work. Occasionally I would steal their work. It's easy to steal from a 4-year-old. They don't really put up a lot of resistance. But I would incorporate it into my collage work because it had a kind of energy and presence that I could fake, but why fake it when they're just throwing the stuff away anyway? Paul Clay,
Brothers Ted and Tim,
yeah,
you bring to us a wonderful family gift of, well, as you were saying, you were drawing before you were even listening too much to anybody speaking, either in church or wherever, and it just became a part of you, but your family encouraged it, and we are so grateful you have brought your Murphy family to us. Huh? Thank you, thank you.